Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion. This is the Backlog, and I really need to come up with a better intro for these things. Anyway, another 2 Castlevanias this week, starting with Castlevania Bloodlines, originally for the Sega Genesis. Oddly enough, in this one, you don't play as a Belmont, but instead as either Eric Lacard, a guy with a spear, or John Morris, a guy with the more typical whip. From the description, it seems like the latter is related to the Belmonts, just with a different name that might tie him into an actual Dracula novel character, and the other guy is just a friend of his that's willing to help him out. What a buddy. And as you would expect, after choosing one of these two, you set out to kill Dracula. Do I even need to say that anymore? Is there any Castlevania game where that isn't the point? I'm not criticizing, I'm just wondering if I sound like an idiot, mentioning that you gotta kill Dracula every time I talk about one of these games. So anyway, I played as Morris, because of course I gotta go with the whip, right? He plays a little bit differently than the Belmonts, at least the iterations that I've dealt with thus far. He can still crack his whip straight ahead, but Morris can also use it on an upwards diagonal and straight down while in the air. If that wasn't enough, if he hits the ceiling with it, it'll latch on and let him swing back and forth to clear gaps and obstacles. And while the whip has a basic form, then a longer one, the final tier turns the weapon into what looks like electricity, which, up-powered aside, looks pretty cool too. Morris also seems to have a little more control of his jumps. They're still a bit stiff to be sure, but having a bit more agency on your trajectory and where you land is still pretty darn nice. Sub-weapons are still here, most of the ones you're used to, and they work largely the same. Just this time your ammo for using them are crystals instead of hearts. Not really sure why. Did someone just decide that collecting hearts was too girly? Or since this game didn't have a Belmont, at least in name, did they just want to make this stand out in other ways as well? I'm probably more curious about this than I should be. As you might expect, the game is a bit easier than what came before. Part of it is the extra attack and movement options to get around and fight off enemies, of which come in much more manageable numbers. And that's not to say that this game still isn't challenging. There's still some foes that are pretty tricky to deal with. It's still designed for a smaller television, so sometimes enemies can get the jump on you by rushing you from off screen, and there are some just pretty tricky and unique stage mechanics to deal with, such as needing to climb a tower up a spinning staircase, or a hallway where everything gets flipped upside down. The directional pad still corresponds to how you're looking at it though, so no getting cute in either flipping the screen or playing it while standing on your head. This also seems to be the Castlevania with the most bosses, most stages having at least one sub-boss and then culminating in a stage boss like normal. The last stage in particular really puts you through your paces, you eventually reaching a boss rush where you fight 4 of them, followed by a battle with Death, then a 2-stage boss after that, and then finally a 3-stage battle with who else but Dracula. And other than Death and Dracula, all of the bosses feel unique to this game, and other than a few pretty basic mid-stage fights, all look pretty cool and have interesting battles. I kinda hope some of them get recycled later on. Back to difficulty, when you get game over, you go back to the beginning of the stage, which isn't too bad. None of the sections are too obscene on their own, so as you'd probably figure, the big challenge is all about getting through each one without making too many mistakes. That's just about every game, I know, but with these stages feeling a bit longer, or at least a bit more jam-packed, it feels a bit more relevant here. Still though, while I used saved states for this, I'd made use of them much less than normal, and with the exception of the last 2 bosses, this felt like the level of difficulty I could have gotten by with without them. They just had a lot of phases at the end there though. This is probably the Castlevania game that I've liked the most so far. Between Morris's extra moves, the graphics looking pretty nice on Genesis, along with the unique enemies, and the difficulty being hard but not pull your hair out hard, it was a very fun experience. I was satisfied clearing it with just one character for the purposes of my backlog, but I probably will go back and play it again with Lacard. This and the first Castlevania are the only ones I feel a desire to revisit. Maybe 3 if I get pretty good at the original and want to test myself and experiment with the side paths a bit more. Bloodlines was a very fun time, and if you get the chance to play it, I'd recommend you do so. I also tackled the second Gameboy title, Castlevania 2, Belmont's Revenge. Seems I was wrong when I said that the first one was another Simon adventure. Instead, it seems both grayscale outings actually belong to a guy called Christopher, though he's also a Belmont, as you'd expect. It seems like his son has come of age, but before he can be knighted as a vampire hunter, he gets possessed and runs off, so it's up to Chris to get him back and kill Dracula again. That's the second time this week. This game's non-linear. You have 4 levels to play through in whatever order you choose, and upon completing them, you get a few final levels to tackle. As for the gameplay, it's somewhere between the other Game Boy title and the original Castlevania. You're still pretty slow, but you still have the 3-stage whip power-ups, with the last being the one that gives you a projectile. Health isn't so easy to come by anymore, but the sub-weapons also return, giving you a bit more to work with. There are also more enemies on screen than in the previous title, and some do have pretty unpredictable movements, but it never gets quite to the point that the NES games do, with their infinitely spawning Medusa heads harassing you as you try to navigate some tricky sets of platforms on top of whatever else is just purposefully placed in your path. The levels tend not to be too bad to contend with, but the bosses at the end can be pretty harsh. One's a pushover, 2 are more standard challenges, and the last starts out simple, then gets more agile, jumping around with a large hitbox that gets effectively doubled when it swings its sword and seems impossible to dodge. The final stages pit you against essentially your double, only they hit harder and deal damage on contact, and trying to outmaneuver something like that with a character as slow as a Belmont is still a nightmare. The final boss is really rough if you don't have the right sub-weapon, which I didn't, so I saved Scum after every hit, but at least they only have one form this time. Overall, it's another game that isn't horrible, it just isn't anything special either. Like the other Game Boy game, I'd say if you already have access to it, play it until you start getting annoyed, but if you don't, then there's no real reason to seek it out. That leaves just Super Castlevania 4 for the collection, and that's the one in this old style that people seem really keen on, so I've been saving it for last, so that I can go out on a high note with the collection. Come to think of it, didn't I say that if I managed to get through everything else on the set, that I'd give Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest another go? Oh no, what have I done? Why couldn't one other game have just been bad enough to make me rage quit? I doubt 4 will break me if I've got through all the rest, so I really need to give it a second try, don't I? I really don't want to do this, but I guess I'll pull up a playthrough, choose the shortest one I can find, and try to follow it step by step. Save stating when necessary. It won't be graceful, it won't be cool, it won't be honorable, but hopefully it'll be doable. Please pray for my success, and I guess I'll report on that and 4 next week. As for right now though, since both games are part of a larger bundle, the backlog remains at 108. I also did some streaming this past week, 2 Mega Man titles and Mighty No. 9. I thought about talking about that last one, but I think I want to play through one more version of the game. That way I've sampled both the Wii U and PS4 to give myself a better idea, and maybe give the DLC a crack too. Then I might dedicate an episode to it. If that sounds fun, or listening to some person talk about tackling their massive backlog sounds interesting, maybe consider subscribing, and as always, thanks for watching.